Welcome to Conversations That Matter. I'm Michael Turnipseed, Executive Director of the Kern County Taxpayers Association. We certainly hope you find our conversation today to provide you with knowledge and background that you really didn't have before. Our guest today is Dr. Mary Barlow, Kern County Superintendent of Schools, which serves as the educational leader for all Kern County's 47 school districts. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I think we first met back in, 2007 or 8 when you were up in Kernville.
Absolutely. Working as superintendent and contacting you to help with setting up an oversight committee for our school bond.
Well, those have been many roads to go. Tell us, what was your path to get to the superintendent of schools from Kernville? It's not like you were in a big district, came from one of the smaller districts, and that's a very unusual path. So why don't you tell us about it?
Sure. So I was the superintendent for 7 years in Kernville, did a lot of work at the time with declining enrollment and needing to make reductions within our budget. At the same time, serving students who were at risk, who were vulnerable. And so with that, along with a lot of experience with school bonds and construction, I was recruited by Dr. Christine Frazier to come work for an organization called the Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team. I became the deputy of that team and worked statewide with school districts large and small to look at their fiscal condition and make recommendations of how they might trim their budgets to live within their means, if you will. After spending about a year or 2 years in that position, I was recruited to serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Accountability for the Kern County Superintendent of Schools, where we worked with 47 school districts and created such tools as the debt guide, with Lori Ranieri to determine what best practices could be put into place to ensure that we're using taxpayer dollars effectively with regard to construction of facilities. After that, I became the associate superintendent and again worked closely with Dr. Frazier in all aspects of the operation of the office, and in January 2017 was appointed superintendent.
Wow. And you've done a lot of great things since then. Just quick comment on FCMAT. How did that really change your view of being a superintendent? What tools did you get for your toolbox out of spending a couple of years at FCMAT?
Well, the most interesting thing is really getting a chance to look at the varying practices across the state of California and how in many cases they actually were not necessarily aligned with the best practices that FCMAT has created. We have, through the past 25 years in studies of districts in fiscal crisis, identified indicators of fiscal distress and have outlined 15 things that are easily measured and monitored. And when those items are measured and monitored on a regular and systematic basis, we are able to ensure that school districts can operate in a fiscally prudent manner. And so those are some of the most important lessons learned. Some of it was around what not to do, and the other tools were all around what those most productive indicators are to monitor. And just as an aside, my doctorate, my dissertation was related to the fiscal indicators that are most predictive of fiscal insolvency in California school districts.
Wow. You probably have as much economic training as any superintendent in the state then.
No, I won't take that.
but no, I mean, that is an important thing.
It is.
Now, let's kind of talk about March 13th, that infamous Friday, when you had that, oh my God moment, we're going to have to close down all our schools.
Yes, yeah.
Were you ready to jump off the 7th floor building, or what happened out that window when you started thinking about that? So tell us about the preparations you and your staff and your teams and the other superintendents, how did you prepare for your shutdown? You just didn't folks, we're closing the doors. See you. Bye. You did a very thoughtful, I thought, laid plan. So tell us about that, please.
Sure, sure. So weeks in advance, we had been reading about and monitoring the situation in China, Japan, and other parts of the world. And so as part of that recognition that, you know, it was potential to become a pandemic, there were people within our organization that were tasked with the leading different task force regarding different operational areas and doing some research and planning for what it would look like should we have to turn schools into something different, a distance learning environment. And so that began in February. Then when we were starting to hear that it in fact was in the United States, and that in fact it looked like we were going to have some potential changes in our schools, we brought our school district superintendents together and started meeting on a regular basis. As a matter of fact, on that Friday, we had all superintendents in the city center building. We were socially distanced, by the way, already at that point. And we talked about the potentials and the different scenarios and the work that had already been planned for, and how we could turn this into a plan should we need to. At that time, the district superintendents just were very, very adamant about keeping school open as long as possible. And the reason for that is it meets what the governor's executive order requires. So providing childcare for school-aged children, ensuring that distance learning is in fact occurring, and that children who are in need are able to access and have a good, healthy meal. And so when we look at that, it looks a lot like school. We wanted to keep the school doors open as long as possible. That is the best scenario for children. So on the 13th, we decided we were going to do that. In the meantime, the districts were working on what distance learning would look like and putting together packets that could go home with students for a 2 to 4 week period. So if you can think about this, Bakersfield City School District and other districts had already been working on developing these packets across K through 8 in their case. High schools were working on 9 through 12. They needed to make them available in English language learners, you know, to English language learners. They needed to make them available to students with disabilities. And they needed to ensure that they were available in what we call universal design, which means accessible to a lot of different learning styles. And then we shared those resources with one another. And so out of the generosity of Bakersfield City's staff and superintendent, we were able to replicate those packets and disseminate them across the entire county. Now that was crazy.
It's like the Hatfield and McCoys all got together for dinner and said, we're going to have dinner and we're going to eat together. We're going to work together.
Absolutely, everyone did. And there were people, certain districts had already developed social emotional learning that could be shared, you know, different types of activities that could be shared with one another. And together we created some pretty comprehensive work that then my staff, Steve Sanders and Amanda Frank and others, had our print shop over the weekend running 24/7, and then we were calling all of our print companies in the county, neighbors, friends, and some large organizations and corporations such as ERA rather, just copied these packets so that we could deliver them in pallets to school districts so that parents could have something to work with their children at home, because it really happened over a weekend. That was just a phenomenal amount of work. And I can tell you it was around the clock, because we were getting phone calls at 11 o'clock at night and sometimes responding with 15 different people on a Zoom call at 11 o'clock at night trying to fix something that needed to be taken care of by 6 a.m. the next day.
Well, it just shows that education, at least the Kern County Superintendent of Schools, is not an 8 to 5 job.
No, absolutely not.
So you did the preparation. So what happened those first few days when nobody's going to school and you're trying to get kids set up at home on Zoom and packet delivery and all those things? Tell us about how that worked out.
Okay. So we actually had major task force operating with connections at every single school district in the county. So with regard to food delivery, ensuring that we had food service, so that happened the day after we closed. So Tuesday's the last day of in-school education. Wednesday, we're doing distance learning online, but we're delivering food to 108,000 students, breakfast and lunch. And so we were coordinating across all of the major districts and then outlying areas to ensure that the people knew where to pick up their food, when it would be available, and that it was at no cost to the families, including families who might not typically have been on the free and reduced lunch meal plan. It was just a recognition. And so getting people out to those sites, surveying folks to see if they would volunteer to be out at those sites was a lot of work. And then that's one sector, but we were able to do that. And as I said, 108,000 people, meaning 216,000 meals a day on the average, the day after we closed, which is pretty phenomenal. That's a lot of food. So that's,
I heard I think it was Sacramento Unified bragged that they, in the Sacramento Bee, that they put out 1 million meals in a month.
mm-hmm.
You put out 1 million meals in a week.
Yeah, we are.
Continually doing that too.
Yes, still, and will be through the summer. And the important thing is that we were able to do small things along with that. So contributions from partners allowed us to give out toilet paper, the Easter, information, and gift baskets. What was really helpful, though, because we were doing this on a daily basis, we were connecting with children and families who were coming to pick up those meals. And when you look at 108,000, that represents a good number of our 190,000 students that we serve K through 12. Now, that's just one aspect of what happened. The other thing that happened is we have a place in our building on 17th Street, the 5th floor. It's called our Curriculum and Instruction Department or Division. And there's about 80 people who came together that weekend, so the 14th and the 15th, along with their high school, middle school, and elementary partners in different districts, whether it be Panama or Bakersfield City or Kern High, Wasco, came together and started working on developing distance learning. And they worked around the clock. We were very fortunate. We had a company by the name of Canvas. Canvas provides a learning management system that's known throughout the nation and used by most universities and community colleges. And in this learning management system, students are able to access content in different subject areas. They're able to connect with their teachers, and they're able to connect with one another. And so we used the Canvas learning platform and the expert who we were happening to already be working with, because Kern County wanted to, advance that work even before COVID, to quickly develop actual agreements where all 190,000 students through June 30th were accessing Canvas free of charge. Since then, we've been able to come to a negotiated agreement and get financial support from the California Collaborative on Educational Excellence. And we are offering that Canvas platform for the entire school year next year, with an understanding that that particular service will allow parents and students to easily access content. And it's the most robust way to measure progress.
Okay, you've got the platform and the organization. So what happened to the some kids that don't have internet and don't have books, maybe not even the cell phones to use their parents' cell phones?
Right.
How did you keep contact with them?
So let's talk a little bit about what happened. The first, on the 13th, when we knew that we were going to be potentially going to distance learning, I contacted Anthony Davis in our office. He is our Chief Technology Officer, and asked him to start looking for what we would need in terms of devices for those students who didn't have devices in their home. And so he was working with the CTOs of all of the different large districts and small to conduct a survey to determine how many students in their district had connectivity issues and how many students had device. They did not have the sufficient devices. And that was done over a 1-week period. But while we were doing that, we were also sourcing Chromebooks and connectivity, because the state of California and other organizations were doing the same thing. So it was a race to see who could get the sufficient amount of materials that we would need for distance learning. And fortunately, Anthony had a lot of great connections. We were able to call in. Vince Fong helped out. Karen Go was there with us. And I think, you know, I really want to say here the Kern Pledge and the fact that we've been working together so closely in the Kern Education Pledge for the past several years had created that trust and that relationship where you could just pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, we need to get access to, you know, 6,000 Chromebooks. In this case, it was 21,000 Chromebooks. Can you help us? And, you know, Vince would connect us to somebody. Anthony would connect us to somebody, and pretty soon we ended up with 21,000 Chromebooks delivered to our warehouse that we were able to then distribute to those districts who needed those, as well as 6,000 hotspots that were going out to those areas that might not have connectivity. The important thing, though, is we did it wisely. We took a look at something called the Kern Integrated Data System. And in that data system, we were able to look at households through heat mapping that had multiple children in them. So we could distribute the Wi-Fis to the households where multiple children would be able to use and access them. So you can get 5 devices on one hotspot. And so it just made sense, you know, to maximize the number of Wi-Fis. And then the second thing that we did is we equipped 180 different sites around the county. These are our bus loops and our facilities with external Wi-Fi that was accessible. So when parents and students were coming to pick up their food or their books or their next packets, if you will, before they went to the distance learning platform, they were able to download information and or upload information and access the internet should they not have had it at home or have a MiFi delivered to them. And then the third thing we did is we activated buses, so they became mobile, you know, transmitters, if you will. So those buses have something called a cradle point, and we put them in high population areas and remote areas where students might not have internet access, and we made them available for their use. So the key here is students needed connectivity like they need electricity and running water. Students need devices, just they are the textbooks of the future. And because of that, they're able to connect to their parents, I mean, their teachers, they're able to connect to their peers, and that connection is really important for their social emotional health.
You talked about all the tremendous amount of successes, and I know people were still looking for Chromebooks at the end of April.
Yeah.
So you being able to jump the market and take advantage of that is really a salute to you. But some things didn't work as well as didn't work. So what, as we move forward in this new era, what things have to be addressed?
So in terms of the connectivity, we really need to smooth that out. This is a stopgap. And like I said, it needs to become electricity. And so we're working with the CPUC to ensure that we're able to connect those families and ensure permanent connection for internet connect for the families that are most at risk. And I think that, and I don't want to even say most at risk, but the families who are serving children, living and working on a daily basis without the support that they need through access to the general public and services that are available through the internet. And so we absolutely need to make sure that that happens. The second thing after connectivity would be kind of educating folks on what to do with that distance learning. We have trained 6,000 parents, teachers, and administrators on how to use the learning management system or a Google Classroom, but it's not easy. They need additional support. So we're going to need to continue to do that as we transition into the potential for this fall, a resurge or something along those lines. And then finally, I think the important thing is that none of us really know a lot about COVID-19. I mean, we read and we listen to the experts on a daily basis and we learn more every day, but it's mutating, it's unprecedented. And in a district where we have close quarters, 960 square feet is the average classroom size. If we were really going to put students 6 feet apart, that only fits 12 students. We'd almost need to double, and in some cases triple, the amount of facilities we have to be able to have children go to school normal work hours, 8 to 5 coming this fall. And so the challenge will be, what does that look like this fall? And how do we make sure that if we do have partial distance learning, a hybrid kind of situation, how do we make sure that that distance learning is high quality and that we are continuing to deliver the very best education to our students? Because what we don't want to do is lose the progress we've made in the past several years with regard to improving student outcomes.
You kind of answered my next question of what's it going to be like in August. That's still a undecided issue, but you kind of breached the issues that I wanted. How do you have standard classrooms and meet the spacing requirements? In all this, we talked about this, and we've talked about this many times before. It's really an issue of equity and being able to achieve and what's available for the education process. Let's talk about equity in schools and how sometimes this part of the disadvantage is not being addressed by Sacramento when they tell you close your doors. They don't really give consideration to that 30 or 40% of your population that needs additional services. Because we've already talked about, you provide meals, in some cases you provide health care, you provide transportation, you provide a myriad of things that we're not used to thinking about in public schools. So how do we address the bottom third of your students?
Yeah. And so our most vulnerable population, as you know, 30% of our children live in poverty here in Kern County. So we've really been focused on that over the past several years. What we've done in just this last year, we held our first Equity in Education Symposium, and we brought together districts to share their best practices on how to close the achievement gap and how instruction needs to look different for each student depending upon where they're coming from. How many books do they have in their home? What's their experience in terms of having a place to go and do quiet schoolwork or homework? Do they have parents who are able to assist them with the work, particularly when you start getting up into high school, mathematics and science and that type of thing? And so Districts are spending a lot of time in professional development and learning to look at education through that equity lens. And it's all about looking at the student where they are and then helping them advance to the next level. And I really do believe that every single student, it doesn't matter which zip code they reside in and what their potential is, their ability or disability, or their family structure, that they all have talents and they can all become successful contributing members of our society. And so I'm really encouraged by how district staff have been embracing these concepts. And I believe that some of the tools that we've used, such as the social workers, the mental health counselors, the behavior specialists, our foster youth advocates, and other professionals are helping schools address those students who have additional needs, additional physical and emotional needs, and they're wrapping their arms around them. So schools really are a community amongst themselves. So when children are not in school, they are not having the benefit of all of those wraparound services that we provide to help them be physically, emotionally, socially, and academically healthy. And so we really embrace that. We've embraced that role. And that's why through Canvas, we're working very hard to ensure that there's social and emotional units that can be utilized and accessed by both parents, peers, and students to ensure that we continue to advance that equity work.
So now when you wave your magic wand is to make all this work?
It's going to be hard.
No, we've talked several times, and I just want to say, you and I brag about the schools all along, and when you had your press conference announcing all this, we posted it on our webpage and distributed it, because after watching all the rest of the state run around in disarray, you were organized, you had a plan, and you exexecuted.
Thank you.
Just like you were patented. and I mean that with all compliments, and you really want to thank you for the great job you do, and thank you for your time today and your candid comments and insights, because you provided a lot of insights today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael, and for your continued support and the way that you push us to be our very best. You bring great ideas to the table and have been an architect and a key partner in the development of the Kern Education Pledge. So I thank you.
Well, I spend 2-3 hours a day just reading the internet and newspapers and jumping around and seeing what good places are doing. And one of the big things is you listen. We respond and we have conversations, and that's why I am so proud of our partnership we've had with public education, whether it's on the school facility financing or the whole spin-offs, all the spin-offs of the workforce task force, getting dual enrollment in Kern High, the Kern Promise, the Kern Pledge, and everything else that you're doing. It's and a lot of that just doesn't get out, and people just don't know how much work it takes. So once again, thank you.
Thank you.
To our audience, thank you for watching Conversations That Matter. We hope you found today's chat with Mary beneficial. If you have any comments, please go to our website at kerntaxpayers.org and click on Contact Us and leave your thoughts and comments. Once again, thank you for watching Conversations That Matter.